Well, welcome to part 4 of the Water Systems Council Family Business Succession for the Water Well Industry. I appreciate you tuning in today, and today we're going to talk about various types of insurance, and then I'm going to try to tie all of these concepts and loose ends together so that you can get started on your family business succession. Next slide. So we're going to talk about today different types of insurance, tying it all together. We're going to look at, in my experience and in the experience of others, why a lot of family business successions fail, and how you can avoid those failures and successfully transition. And I really do want you to get started after today. Next slide. So we're going to talk about all of these various We're going to talk about these various types of insurance: life insurance, liability insurance, health insurance, disability insurance, long-term care insurance, and workers' compensation insurance. I'm not an insurance salesman, I'm a lawyer, but each of these types of insurance can be very important in your succession plan. So on the next slide, we start by talking about life insurance. And we have a couple of financial planning webinars coming up that I'll tell you about at the end of this presentation. So I am not going to get into life insurance in a whole lot of depth, but I want to talk about it a little bit. Life insurance pays to the beneficiaries a sum of money at the death of the insured. You can get term life, which basically covers you for a set period of time. So you pay the premium and you're insured usually for a year, and then you pay the next premium. But a lot of term policies will have like a 20-year term, where as long as you keep paying the premium, you are insured. You can also have permanent insurance, which has a cash value. And there's just a plethora, a huge variety of different kinds of permanent insurance that is way beyond the scope of what I'm talking about today. But take a look at it. Permanent insurance is going to cost you more because part of that premium is invested and goes towards building up the cash value. Term insurance is generally less expensive, but all it provides is that life insurance for that short period of time. The policy owner is the person who pays the premiums and owns the policy. That's not necessarily the insured. The insured is the person who, upon their death, a benefit is paid to the beneficiaries. Back in the olden days, when the estate tax exemption was very low, we told people that the wife should buy insurance on the husband's life and the husband should buy insurance on the wife's life, and that they should keep those separate. Because if, let's say that you own life insurance on your own life, when you pass away, the proceeds of that life insurance policy are includable in your estate. And today, that's probably not an issue unless you have a very large estate and a fairly large life insurance policy. but it's something to keep in the back of your mind in those extreme circumstances. The beneficiary obviously is the person who gets a death benefit upon your death. Um, and the death benefit, like I said, is included in your estate for estate tax purposes if the insured and the policy owner are the same person. Next slide. There are a lot of different things that we can use life insurance for in estate planning. You might have a surviving spouse or some dependent children or other dependent heirs that need that cash to be taken care of. And so you can use it for that. Perhaps you want to have some cash to pay for your final medical expenses. Some people even get life insurance to pay for their funeral expenses. Maybe you have a lot of debt and you want your family to use the life insurance proceeds to take down and pay that debt down so that they can own the assets debt-free. If you have a very large estate, you might have significant estate administration costs. That's, again, going to be limited to large estates. Maybe you want to, if your company, if your family business is pretty cash poor and the cash flow is tight, you might want to have some life insurance to help you pay operating expenses for a while. Estate taxes. You're not going to have estate taxes unless your estate is over $12 million or over $25 million for a couple. But if you're in that situation, you may need life insurance to help you pay the estate taxes. Second marriages, and I'm going to talk about that more in a minute, but a lot of people get married 2 or 3 times these days, and to make sure that all of your different family members that you wish to be taken care of, or to buy out certain people so that you can make sure that the business is operated by your descendants, your family members, you might want life insurance for that. Life insurance is really handy for buying out people, as I show in the next to last bullet. And then the other thing I talked about earlier, a lot of people want to leave everything that they own to their children equally. If you own a family business, that can often be a recipe for disaster. If you have a family business that supports one family very well, that business may not support 2 families, 3 families, 4 families. In addition, your children, no matter how wonderful they are, might not always get along with each other. They might argue, they might fight. So in a lot of cases, I would say most cases, I recommend that you leave the family business to one child, pick one child. Goes back to that equal but not equitable concept. And so if you leave the business to one child, you might want to have life insurance and name the other child as the beneficiary of the life insurance. It's one way to kind of make it more fair. And then finally, life insurance trust. And I'm going to talk about that shortly. But a life insurance trust can be a really nice little trick to get some of your estate planning and family business succession goals accomplished and not worry about estate tax or not worry about Remember, we talked about last time that your spouse is entitled to a certain percentage of your estate. Well, I'm going to talk about how using life insurance trust, you can get a lot of money out of your estate that your spouse does not have any interest in. So you can make sure that this cash goes to children from another marriage, or I even had a client that had a mistress and had an illegitimate child by that mistress, and he wanted to make sure that his mistress and his illegitimate child were taken care of. And so a life insurance trust can be used for that purpose as well. Next slide. So second marriage, I think we skipped one. The second marriage is, if the child inheriting the business has children from a prior marriage, they may not want to operate the business with a step parent. And I think what I meant to say there was, if the parent who is leaving the business to a child has children from a prior marriage. If you have multiple marriages, step parents, stepchildren, those children might not want to operate the business with a step parent. So you can use life insurance to buy out that step parent's interest. So that's one form of a buyout. Next slide. You can also use life insurance for buyouts in general. If somebody dies and you have to buy out the spouse so that the children can inherit, or if you want to buy out the other non-lineal descendants, life insurance is a good way to do that. We often call that key person insurance. If you lose that key person, then you need some cash to buy out people who might inherit the business or be entitled to part of the business. And if you lose that key person, you just might need the extra cash to make sure that the business can survive until you get things back on a stable ground. Next slide. Now we get to talk about life insurance trust, which is really, I really like this tool. And it can provide for people that you want to provide for while keeping it out of your estate for other purposes. And this is not in your estate for estate tax purposes. It's not in your estate for any type of purpose for spousal claim or anything of that nature. So what you do is you set up a trust and you name an independent trustee. It should not be you. It should not be your spouse. It should be some independent person. And you can either, I think the best way to do it, you have a $15,000 annual gift tax exclusion now. So you give to the trustee $15,000 every year. It can be less than that, it can be more than that. I'm using that example because that's a gift tax exemption that is also generally exempt from any claims by your spouse. You can give away that $15,000 and nobody has a claim to it. Now, technically, the trustee does not have to buy life insurance, but it's kind of a wink, wink, and a nod deal where the trustee is going to take that $15,000, pay a premium on a life insurance policy. The beneficiary might for example, be a child from a prior marriage. Upon the death, instead of getting $15,000 or $100,000, that beneficiary gets whatever the benefit of that life insurance policy is, which might be a few $1,000,000. My client, if I remember right, bought a $5 million life insurance policy. And so upon his death, his child from a prior relationship or whoever you want gets $5 million tax-free, free of the claims of anybody else. Now, life insurance trusts are not as valuable for keeping assets out of your estate for estate tax purposes. But if you have a special situation, somebody that you want to provide for, then this can be a really good tool. And you could use it for that child that, hey, I'm going to leave the business to my daughter, but for my son that's not going to get the business, I'll set up this life insurance trust. So it can be a really valuable tool. Next slide. Okay, that's all I want to talk about life insurance. Now I'm going to really briefly talk about these other types of insurance. Liability insurance, or for some professions, professional responsibility insurance, protects against claims resulting from injuries and damage to people or property. So if you're a well contractor and you go out on a job and there's an accident, perhaps your well rig malfunctions, or there's some type of accident, it tips over, it damages property, and we don't want to think about this. Maybe there's some personal injury too. Now, if it's a personal injury to an employee, that's going to be covered somewhere else. But if it's a third person, they're going to have a claim against your company. They're probably going to file a lawsuit against you. If you have liability insurance that covers that incident, not only will it pay any claim up to the policy limits, but it'll pay your attorney's fees. The insurance company hires an attorney to represent you, and if there's a judgment and it's covered, it will pay out that judgment, as long as you have enough insurance. So a lot of people ask me, how much insurance should I get? I think for any business, I would want to have $1 million policy. If you have significant assets, or if you are in a really risky business, I would look at upping that to $2, $3, $5 million. I also recommend that you talk to your insurance agent and get a quote for $1 million, get a quote for $2 million, get a quote for $5 million. Often the difference in price is not significant. So it's up to you then. What makes you sleep well at night, and what's the difference in the prices? The other thing I really recommend, most people never talk to their insurance agent. They get a bill in the mail, they write a check, send the check back, that's it. And they never talk to their insurance agent until something happens. Then when something happens, you talk to the agent. And lawyers, they like to say, it depends. Insurance agents like to say, that's not covered. And if you don't talk to your agent and your agent doesn't know what you are doing, there's a chance that what that accident might not be covered. I think the example that I would use for water well contractors is maybe you've expanded your business a little bit and now you do on-site septic, but you never told your insurance agent that you added that to your portfolio. So you're putting in some on-site septic, there's an accident, you call up your insurance agent and they said, I'm looking at your policy, you're covered for water well installation, that's it. I don't see anything on here about you doing on-site septic, so you're not covered. So it's really advisable to sit down and talk with your agent periodically, at least once a year, and say, well, this has changed in my business, or am I adequately covered? And again, I'm not trying to sell insurance to you, but when that accident happens, you need insurance. I don't think there's anybody who should be in business that doesn't have adequate liability insurance. And I know I talk to some farmer groups sometimes, and some farmers will tell me, well, I can't afford to buy liability insurance. And my answer is, you can't afford to be in that business then. Because the fact is that we are in a litigious society and lawsuits happen. And I want to make sure you're covered if that happens. And you should want to make sure you're covered. Because if you don't have, okay, what if you don't have insurance? Number one, you have to pay the lawyer. It depends on the situation, but you could be talking about $10,000, $50,000, $100,000. Can you afford that from your operating income? If you can, then you're quite the business, but otherwise I think you need to protect yourself. And then of course you would have to pay any judgment against the business. So that's a good thing to take note of and make sure that you're covered. Next slide. Health insurance, and I'm really not going to talk much about this. Most of you know what it is. It pays for your medical, surgical, maybe dental expenses. It might be a good benefit that you provide for your employees, but if you do, you know that it's quite an expensive benefit, but very important. Again, I can't imagine going without health insurance. I know some young people do it, but if you don't have health insurance and something happens to you, it can be really catastrophic. I'm not a health insurance expert. It's just something that I think, take a look at it, see what you can do. When I had my own law firm and had employees, I paid for their health insurance, and that meant that I could pay them a little less in salary, and they really appreciated the health insurance. You have to have it. I know people who have delayed their retirement because they can't afford to retire because of health insurance. So another thing to look at. Next slide. Disability income insurance. And this is a tricky one because it can be very expensive as well. But if you become disabled because of an accident and you can't go out and do your water well contracting business or whatever your business is, and you're the key person for that business, then you have no income. And what disability insurance does is provide you with 60 or 80% of your normal income if you become disabled. It can be difficult to qualify for, it can be expensive, but again, if you become disabled, that might be the thing that ends your family business. So I would urge you to take a look at it, see whether it makes sense to get it or not. And I'll pause for a second here and say for all of these types of insurance, if you're a small business, you might not be able to afford to go out on the market and get it yourself. I would look to your trade groups. I know that the National Groundwater Association offers some type of insurance benefits. I'm not exactly sure what they offer, but other professional groups that you're a member of may also provide some insurance benefits. And by that, I mean that you can be part of their group when you're purchasing various types of insurance. So check those organizations that you're a member of and see if that provides you any benefit. And next slide. Long-term care insurance is also another really tough one because it can be very expensive. I know that I was lucky that the university that I was working for offered a group long-term care insurance policy at a very affordable price. So I jumped on it and got it. And what that pays for is if you have to go to a nursing home or other type of assisted living facility after a certain waiting period, this long-term care insurance will pay for your nursing home up to a pre-selected amount. All of the types of insurance that I'm talking about try to protect you, because if you don't have insurance and these expenses come up, you might lose your business because of it. This is yet another one. So I urge you to take a look at it, see if any of the professional groups that you're a member of have any long-term care group policies that you can participate in, and check it out. See how risk averse or risk preferring you are. If you can get it at a fairly decent price, it's worth having. You do get Social Security, Medicaid, the Medicaid, I'm sorry, will pay for nursing homes in certain situations, but that benefit is kind of limited. And also you have to pay down your assets before that will kick in. So long-term care insurance can really help in that situation. Next slide. Workers' comp insurance, I'm going to just really briefly talk about it. That covers employees within the scope of their employment when they get injured. For those of you who are rather large companies, you are required to participate in the state's workers' compensation program. For very small businesses, you might not be required to. I would ask my insurance agent if you are not required. Workers' comp insurance is a trade-off. If there's no workers' comp insurance, the employee has to file a lawsuit against you. The employee then might get a multi-million-dollar judgment. That will take them years and years of litigation to get. They might get zero. Under workers' comp, it's kind of morbid when you read it, but if you read the law, what it says is if the employee loses a finger, that is worth a certain percentage of their income. If they lose a leg, that is worth a certain percentage of their income. If they, God forbid, lose their life, that's worth a certain percentage of their income, or a certain multiple of their income. And they get that money, it's fairly certain and it's fairly quick. But it's less than what they would get if they would file a lawsuit and hit the jackpot, so to speak. So it's a balancing. For those of you, again, who don't have workers' comp because it's not required, check it out. It might be beneficial for you. Next slide. So there are all the different insurances that you can get, and it's just something to think about. Now I'm going to try to take everything that we talked about, try to tie it all together, and try to see if we can proceed to get you guys started on your family business succession plan. Family businesses have what some people call the familyness advantage. When you're a family business, your customers like that, and it can be a big benefit for you. It can also sometimes be a negative because families sometimes have baggage. And what I see a lot of times in family businesses, somebody did something 20 years ago that another family member took as a slight, and the person who did it might not even know it, but the other person is still upset with them. And that lingers on. It's kind of like a scab that keeps getting picked at. Definitely you want the fact that you're a family business to be an advantage. And so look at, I'm going to talk about some things shortly about how to make sure you don't have those lingering issues in your business. Next slide. Family businesses are tough. I used to do, when I first started practicing law, I did divorce and I hated it because a lot of times the husband and the wife are never going to be happy because the marriage didn't turn out very well. After that, I started to doing some employment law, and I found out it was the same thing because employees feel like the same as if their spouses had scorned them if they get fired. You add family into that formula and you've got a family and you've got a business, and it's really difficult. But why do family business successions fail? First of all, often it's just poor planning. I would say the number one reason is my second bullet, the lack of communication. I have had family businesses come to me, and I talk to mom and dad, and mom and dad tell me, Joe, my son, wants to inherit the business. So I've got him all lined up to inherit the business. My daughter, Mary, she's not really interested. She's got other things she wants to do. Then I bring the kids in, and Joe says, I'm not interested in taking over the business. I'm just working there because I feel like my dad expects me to. I hate it. And I talked to Mary, and she says, I would really like to take over the family business, but nobody's ever talked about it. Communication is the number one thing that family businesses need to do. And that can address my next bullet, conflicts within the family. And probably everybody who's listening here, you have no conflicts in your family. Everybody gets along, everything's perfect. But for a lot of families, that's not the case. There can just be conflicts of personality, generational conflicts. The parents and the grandparents think very differently than the children and the grandchildren, and that can cause a lot of clash. Fear of the unknown, and that is something that I think all of us suffer from. And in the family business succession context, it's mom and dad, the older generation. I don't know what's coming when retirement comes, and do I really want to retire? In some industries, surveys show that most people don't plan to retire. They just remain in the business until they die, or they're just not physically able to go on. And then death, that's a really hard thing. I talked about wills earlier in an earlier webinar. I did dozens, hundreds of wills for people, and it was no big deal for me. When I sat down to sign my own will, it was a very strange feeling. I often will do draft wills for people and send it to them, and I won't hear from them for months, and I'll follow up and try to ask them. Mostly it's because I don't want to think about when I die. It's a hard thing to think about. A lot of you are going to say, yeah, I need to work on this, but man, it is really busy right now and I don't have time. And hey, I have to admit, I'm doing my own estate planning right now, and I've been working on it for 2 years, and I still don't have it done because I don't have time, and that's terrible. You have to make time for it. A lot of businesses, especially these days, they don't have a successor. None of the kids want to go on in the business, or you might have a child who wants to take over the business, but they just don't have what it takes. And that's part of the communication, is that family members need to be honest with each other, maybe even brutally honest. And Alex White, who will be talking financial planning, he actually has some questionnaires that he gets family members to fill out. And those questionnaires often show that little Billy, who wants to take over the family business, he just doesn't have the financial skills or the business skills to do it. And the family can't really fool themselves by turning it over to that next generation. That's why a lot of family businesses don't last more than 1 or 2 generations, is because of an unqualified heir. A lot of people will treat succession as a one-time event. You go into the lawyer's office, you sign all the documents, we're done. No, it has to be continually revisited. I talked about those different generations, different visions. A lot of people don't want conflict. They avoid conflict. But by avoiding conflict, you avoid the underlying issues and the problems continue on. Governing challenges, and that's related to the next one, control. Who's the boss? Who makes decisions? And I think I have time to tell a short story, true story. I was representing a family business where we had 3 generations. Granddad was 90 years old. The son was 60 years old. The grandson was 30 years old, approximately. So Dad, who's 60 years old, calls me up one day and says, I want to talk. Can you come over? So I went over and we sat down and talked. And Dad said, what do you think a good age is to start turning over control of business to the next generation? And I said, well, you know, Billy's 30 years old now. I think it's probably time to start turning over some of the decision making to him. And he said, oh, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about my dad. He's 90 years old and he won't let me make any decisions. And that's a huge issue that we have with people who have built that business with their blood, sweat, and tears. And they love their kid, but that's their baby. Their business is their baby, and they can't trust it with anybody else. But if you can't turn over some of the responsibility to the next generation, then you're in trouble, because that business has a high chance of not succeeding. So finding that balance is really important. And last but not least is sometimes you have a hard time finding a trusted lawyer, financial advisor, accountant. It's really important to get that team together. And next slide. So these are what we just talked about are some of the reasons that business successions fail. On the next slide, I want to talk about what are some keys to making sure that that succession is successful. And these are related to the failures in a lot of ways. First of all, have a plan. Only 58% of family businesses have a succession plan. And that, you know, that's not good, but it looks fairly decent. But then you say, well, wait a minute, most of these plans are really informal. They're not in writing. They're just kind of an idea. And then half of that 58% or 29% haven't even identified a successor. So there's a real lack of planning. And you also have to start that planning early. A lot of times people will wait until they get sick or until they get to the age where it's almost time for them to get out of the business. It's important to start thinking about it early so that you can start planning for that. And don't do it by yourself. You have to talk to and include other family members. And, you know, that gets into the touchy question of how about the in-laws and the outlaws. And I'm a strong believer that you should involve the in-laws. I like to have some meetings where the in-laws are not invited, and then some meetings where the in-laws are invited. I've seen too many situations where a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law is the person that's driving the conflict, driving the problem. And a lot of times the best way to deal with that is get them into some of the meetings where you're talking about what you're going to do. A lot of times that helps make them more reasonable. Be realistic. Does your business generate enough income for both of your children or all three of your children? Does it generate enough income for you to continue to draw income from the business while you're retired or semi-retired, and your child draw income from that? Be realistic about how capable your children are and about what is really feasible in the business. A lot of times it's difficult to separate family from business. And you might want to, for example, leave the business to the children equally, or leave the business to a particular child because you don't want to hurt their feelings, or a family. So I want to make sure everybody's involved. But sometimes you have to say, we're going to look at the business and we're going to do what's best for the business. A family business is not a family business if it goes out of business. So you have to make sure the business survives. Train your successor. And that goes back to control a little bit. You have to get that successor involved in the business, let them learn, let them do some things on their own, and kind of get some experience so they can take over. And a really important point is to get outside help. A lot of times a family can't see the forest for the trees. And sometimes it's useful, a lot of times it's useful to get somebody from outside the business to come in. And maybe they say that thing that everybody's thinking, but they don't want to offend somebody. Or maybe they say that thing that everybody hopes that we have enough income, or hopes that the business is strong enough. And that outside person can come in and say, well, you might be able to do this, but to be successful, you're going to need to address these 3 issues, or something of that nature. Get an outside look at things. I actually, for some businesses, if you're able to do this, the successor, the child that's going to take over for you, I like to send them somewhere else and let them work somewhere else for a while. Number one, they see how different companies do it, and they might get some good ideas or find out what doesn't work. Number two, I find out the parents get a lot smarter after the kids have worked for somebody else. Then they find out that things aren't always greener on the other side, and they get some valuable experience. Next slide, please. So how are you going to get started? I'm hoping if I can do one thing through this 4-part succession planning webinar series, I want you to get started on your succession plan. I want you to take some concrete steps. And how do you get started? First of all, you need to find a process. How are you going to go about this? If you just kind of jump in and start doing it haphazardly, it might not work. So what process are we going to follow to get this done? Step back a little bit. The first thing, and we often do this kind of stuff first when I'm talking about succession planning. But when I thought about it, I said, it might be better to put this last so that when people are ready to get going, it's fresh in their mind. Well, the first thing we tell everybody when they're starting off, what are your values and what are your goals? If your goal is to keep this business in the family, that tells you one thing that you need to do. If your goal is to retire and be able to live a very luxurious lifestyle at your beach house in the Caribbean, that's a different goal that you're going to have to do different things to achieve that goal. And what are your values as well? A lot of families especially I go back to family farmers because they have land that has been in the family for decades or longer. And their value is that this land has been in my family forever, and it's never going to go outside the family. And we want to keep this going. My value is not that I want to maximize income. I want to continue to have my family live on this land. Start with that broader view. Start with your goal. If you don't know what your goal is, you can't get there. You're just kind of wandering aimlessly. And establish a vision. What's your business going to look like after you transition it? A lot of family businesses, the parents and the children have very different visions for what the business is going to look like. Often the older generation wants to keep doing exactly what they've been doing. And the younger generation might say, I want to expand into these different areas or switch our focus a little bit. And that's a generalization. That doesn't apply to every family. But the generations need to get together and say, what's this going to look like when we hand it down? And what does everybody in the family want? And these are 4 different columns here. What do they want? What do they need? What are their expectations and what are their fears? It's really good to sit down and talk to people about that. Again, communication, communication, communication. The next thing is similar, but maybe a bigger picture. How many of your businesses have done a SWOT analysis? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Look at the business from that lens. Big businesses do that all the time. A lot of small family businesses don't, and that's a mistake. Check it out and see, are there opportunities for expansion or contraction or just looking at things different that can help your business move forward? What are the threats and how do you deal with those threats? What are some things that your business does really well and you want to continue to do well? And what are some things that your business is not doing very well and you need to address? It's really good to sit down and look at that. And that professional team. Like I said earlier, I'm not an insurance agent. I'm a lawyer. I'm not particularly fond of lawyers, and you probably aren't either. But to have a successful succession plan, you probably need a lawyer that you can trust and knows what they're doing. An insurance agent that you can work with. An accountant. Maybe a financial planner. Get together your team of trusted advisors and let them help you through this process. It can be difficult finding these people. I often get that question, how do I find a good lawyer? And I think the best way is word of mouth. Talk to your friends, your colleagues, and say, who do you have? Who do you use? And was that a good experience? Was that a bad experience? And so talk to friends, neighbors, colleagues, see if they can point you in the right direction. And don't be afraid to interview the lawyer or to interview the accountant and say, a lot of times a lawyer will let you talk to them for a small, relatively small, one-time initial consultation fee. Talk to 5 different lawyers. Sit down and talk to them and find out whether there's one that you're comfortable with and pick that one. Don't just pick a name out of the phone book and go with them. That usually doesn't turn out well. Next slide. I'm talking about communications a lot. Here I am again. Family meetings are essential. And before the family meetings, you have to have a set of rules of engagement. And that is things like no personal attacks. Only one person talks at a time. What we call land the plane, which is, that means don't talk for 20 minutes to make a point that you can make in a minute. And don't just repeat what everybody else says. If Joe says something and you agree with it, don't repeat everything Joe says. Just say, I agree with Joe, but I would add X. It's important to have those rules of engagement. Stick to the point of the meeting. Generational differences I've already talked about. And seriously consider whether you need a mediator. There's no shame in that. Do you need a neutral outside party to facilitate your meeting? Facilitating meetings is not easy. It's a skill. And if you have a contentious family situation, you might need a mediator. Next slide. Here are some of the rules of engagement again. Who's going to be there, who's invited, what are you going to do, and stick to your agenda. When is everybody able to be there, where, very important. If you have it at mom and dad's house, mom and dad have home field advantage, or there might be some type of stigma there. I usually recommend a neutral site, hotel conference room, something like that. Someplace quiet, no distractions. You might want to all put your cell phones away. Can't have your cell phone with you. Get down to business. And why do you want to do this? Because this is going to give you a competitive advantage. Next slide. And I know I'm running a little short on time here. I'm going to go through these last few things. From a lawyer's point of view, what's the blueprint for success? Collect some information for the lawyer before you go in there, so that you can give them the documents that they need. Value the business, get an appraisal of the business so that you know how much it's worth. Establish that business continuation plan in writing and check it periodically. You might have to restructure things, think about that. Your operating agreement, the agreement that governs how your business operates. A lot of lawyers will do a boilerplate document. No, you need something tailored to your business. And you need a buy-sell agreement within that document. What are some key contracts with internal people, external companies that you need? Look at your estate plan and update it. I recommend at least once a year, look at it. Plan for the older generation's retirement. How are you going to live when you retire? And think about the possibility of lifetime transfers to the next generation. That might be another way to equalize the gifts. Give the business to one child, give something to the other child while they're alive to help them buy a house, to get started in their business or whatever. Next slide. Your succession team, again, attorney, accountant, financial planner, mediator. Should have put insurance agent up there too. Next slide. Identify what's holding you back. Is there a roadblock? Is there a family member? Is there one of your customers, a key employee? Are you the problem? If the whole business succession process seems too daunting, break it up into smaller steps. Say, we're going to have, the first thing that we're going to do, we've never had a family meeting. So that's my first goal, to have a family meeting, let everybody kind of put out there what their thoughts are. Or we're going to deal, you know, we never did form a corporation or an LLC. Let's start with that. Or let's start with the senior generation looking at their estate plan. Get a first step so you can get going. Establish some benchmarks. I want to have my estate plan done by 6 months from today. Or I want to have my second family meeting within 3 months. And try to stick to that. And now it's time for you to go. Get going. Get this family business succession plan started. We want your family to stay in business for a long, long time. And a lot of that is up to you. Next slide. I think the next slide, I believe we are ready for questions. I will check to see we do not have any questions that I have seen yet. While we're waiting for the possibility of questions, if you go to the next slide, think about joining Water Systems Council. They are the group that put this webinar on. You can contact Erin Kaufman at the number on the slide. She is ready, willing, and able to help you get going. Check out our website. Next slide. We've got some more going on here. If you liked what we did here, and I hope you did, you're really gonna like my friend, Professor Alex White. He's gonna give you some financial planning tips that really everybody needs. I've heard Alex talk a lot. We're good friends, and I've learned a lot from Alex, and that's on September 10th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time and September 24th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And certainly, yeah, check out the Water Systems Council YouTube channel. This webinar, past webinars, future webinars will be on that YouTube channel. And last but not least, if we look to that last slide, I want to thank you all for being here, for listening. I hope you learned something. Please feel free to contact Water Systems Council if you have any questions or want to follow up on anything that we talked about. I hope we see you at Alex White's next webinar on September 10th. And again, thank you so much. And I want everybody to stay safe and stay healthy.